My name is Julian Reese, and if you ask anyone in the Whitmore family, I'm Mr. Nobody. It was Thanksgiving, and their penthouse glowed like the inside of a snow globe, polished marble, fresh orchids, golden accents, and the thick kind of silence only generational wealth can afford. I'd worn my best suit. Midnight navy, tailored, subtle pattern along the lapels. Still, I might as well have walked in wearing the Queen's bus route printed across my chest. Camilla, my wife of 3 years, kissed me softly on the cheek when I arrived, her lips grazing skin like an apology she didn't dare voice out loud. Julian, Margot Whitmore greeted me with a tight smile, holding a champagne flute like it was an extension of her arm. The kitchen's just through there. I blinked, not quite understanding. She turned to the rest of the room, and that's when she said it. Servants eat separately. The air didn't drop. No gasps. Just polite laughter. The kind rich people serve when they've decided someone doesn't matter enough to take seriously. Everyone chuckled like I'd missed a cue in their play. Her brother Ronan didn't even look up from his wine. Camilla didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't move. So I did what they all expected. I smiled, swallowed hard, and walked into the kitchen like a guest who didn't know better. The doors swung shut behind me with a soft whoosh, and the room I entered was a world away from the glittering one I just left. The catering staff, 10 or 12 of them, buzzed around in matching black shirts, plating heirloom carrots and basting a turkey that cost more than my first apartment. They looked up when I entered, hesitant, unsure. One of them gestured toward a stool near the prep counter. I sat. No one spoke to me at first. Why would they? I looked like one of those guests who got lost on the way to the powder room. But after a few minutes, after they saw I wasn't demanding a custom cocktail or complaining about truffle density, they started talking around me about the timing of the courses, the seating chart, the way Margot had insisted on a second turkey. Just in case the first one tasted poor. I didn't laugh, but inside, something bitter curled in my chest. I'd spent my life building something that didn't require me to grovel for a chair at anyone's table. I grew up in Jackson Heights, 2 siblings in a 3-bedroom apartment with creaking floors and hand-me-down ambition. My mother scrubbed hospital rooms. My father painted walls until his hands curled from arthritis. I started working at 15, stocking hardware stores, running errands, flipping whatever I could for a buck. By 30, I was managing 5 properties. By 35, I owned 40. Now, over 200 under Sterling Group's name. But none of that mattered here. Because in this house, Margot's house, I was just the +1 with the wrong last name. One of the kitchen staff offered me a cider, warm but going tepid. I thanked her. I was polite. I even smiled. Because that's what they wanted. Someone forgettable, someone quiet, someone who knew better than to demand space in a room he hadn't been born into. But this time, I wasn't going to be silent for long. I glanced back toward the swinging door that led to the dining room. Through the circular window, I could see the family raising their glasses. Camilla beside them, her back straight, her profile sharp and unreadable. She looked beautiful as always. Composed, sculpted, as if she were born under chandelier light. But what struck me wasn't her beauty. It was her silence. She had watched her mother humiliate me. She had heard the laughter. She hadn't said a single word. And that, more than the insult, more than the exclusion, is what broke something loose inside me. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was worse. Cold. Clear. Certain. I sipped the cider, barely tasting it. Around me, the staff laughed about something. A spilled garnish, a mix-up with the gravy boat. Real people, real voices. There was no pretense here. Just work, movement, breath. But the longer I sat, the more the disconnect grew. Not because I thought I was above them, but because I knew I wasn't meant to be here. Not in this kitchen. Not in this role. Because what none of them knew, not Margot, not Ronan, not even Camilla in full, was that I owned the very floor they were standing on. The building? Mine. Whitmore Holdings had sold it in a discreet deal 2 years ago when their cash flow hit a snag. The buyer? A shell company under Sterling Group's portfolio. And now that company belonged entirely to me. I looked around slowly, letting that fact settle in my bones. Every crystal pendant above the dining room table, every inch of imported Italian stone in the foyer, every brass faucet and marble tile had technically been leased under my approval. Mr. Nobody, indeed. Camilla knew I had money. Of course she did, but I'd never told her the full scope of it. She'd married me when I was still climbing, when Sterling Group was making waves in niche markets but hadn't yet gone global. I'd kept it that way, partly out of strategy, partly out of a need to see who loved me before the spotlight hit. Turns out, even love has its limits when tradition and power play gatekeeper. The stool I was sitting on creaked faintly beneath me. I stood, slow and calm, and walked over to the small sink to rinse my glass. A few heads turned. One of the caterers smiled politely. I nodded back. There was dignity here, even in this. But I wasn't going to remain quiet anymore. As I dried my hands on a paper towel, I felt the vibration in my pocket, my phone. I checked it out of habit, expecting some automated alert. Instead, I saw a name. Marcus. My CFO. And the message that lit the fuse. I didn't belong in that kitchen. Not because I thought I was better than the staff, no. Those people worked with precision, pride, and integrity. I built my company with men and women like them. But I didn't belong there because I was the only one in that room pretending to be someone I wasn't. That had always been the game with the Whitmores, shrink to fit. Speak less. Smile more. Dull the edges of where I came from so they could polish me into something palatable. But I was done playing house guest in a building I owned. I sat back down on the edge of the catering bench, legs slightly spread, elbows resting on my knees, the posture of a man balancing between patience and the first flicker of something sharper. My phone buzzed against my thigh. I pulled it out, half expecting some dry family group text about what pies were being served next. Instead, it was Marcus, my CFO, the man who'd stood beside me from day one, who had the mind of a Wall Street shark but the instincts of someone who still remembered eating government cheese in the 90s. He didn't waste words. Dubai signed. You now own the largest private real estate portfolio in the Northern Hemisphere. Congratulations, Marcus. I blinked once. Read it again. The corners of my mouth lifted, just barely. I didn't smile often, but this was a moment that deserved it. A quiet, satisfied pull of pride, nothing flashy. I stared at that message like it was a lit match in a room filled with gas. Because it wasn't just about the portfolio. It was about what it meant. Legacy, power, visibility. The anonymity I had so carefully cultivated had just evaporated, whether I was ready or not. The Dubai deal had been in the works for months. Sterling Group had moved silently, acquiring towers, land parcels, and water rights through subsidiaries so discreet, most of the brokers never even realized they were working for the same umbrella. It was my masterpiece. And it was done. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a screenshot, Bloomberg's front page. My name in bold. The headline read, Julian Reese closes $3.8 billion Dubai deal. Sterling Group becomes top global landholder. And just like that, I was no longer invisible, no longer anonymous. The curtain had been pulled back. The man in the kitchen was the same man who had just outmaneuvered every major holding firm from Manhattan to Abu Dhabi. And none of the people in that dining room had a clue they'd been brushing elbows with a king in disguise. That's when I heard it, a knock. Sharp. Clean. Not the kind of tap you hear from a neighbor or a kid selling cookies. This knock was confident. Measured. It echoed through the marble foyer like punctuation. I glanced toward the hallway leading to the front door. The catering staff paused too, looking toward the source. I didn't move at first. I wasn't even sure why I felt it. The sense that this wasn't just a late guest or a delivery. This knock carried weight. A few seconds passed. Then another knock. Harder this time. I stood slowly, slid my phone into my pocket, and nodded to one of the chefs who had started toward the door. I've got it. He hesitated, probably wondering if I had the authority. Poor guy didn't realize he was standing in my building. I walked out of the kitchen, the warmth and steam of it replaced by the crisp, perfumed chill of the Whitmore penthouse. The hallway stretched like a runway, framed artwork, gilded sconces, and a mirror at the end that always made you check your posture before entering the main room. The dining area was off to the left. I could hear forks clinking. Polite laughter. They still didn't know. I reached the door and opened it. Standing there in a charcoal overcoat was Dominic Lau, Camilla's business partner, and one of the few people who actually knew who I was. His gaze flicked past me quickly, scanning the scene over my shoulder, then returned to my face. Julian. Dom, I said, stepping back so he could enter. He did, peeling off his gloves and glancing around the penthouse with a look that said he'd rather be anywhere else. You weren't supposed to show up until dessert, I said quietly, leading him away from the door. He looked me up and down, his jaw tensing. I got the alert. Marcus texted you? No, he said. Bloomberg did. We both paused at the base of the hallway. Through the dining room archway, we could hear Margot's voice floating above the others, something about a new vineyard partnership, a future investment in Napa, as if they owned the damn soil. Does Camilla know? I asked. Dominic's expression didn't shift. She will. I nodded once, then turned back toward the kitchen. Wait, he said, grabbing my sleeve. Why are you coming from the kitchen? And that was the moment. I looked him square in the eye, my voice low but steady. Because that's where Margot told me to go. Dominic's eyes widened, not with shock, but with fury. Not for himself. For me. The injustice of it, the audacity of it. And maybe, somewhere deep down, the betrayal of Camilla letting it happen. She sent you, he started, but I cut him off with a glance. The catering staff had stepped into the hall now, sensing something was happening. I wasn't hiding anymore. Dominic stepped forward, into full view of the dining room. Why, he said loudly enough to halt conversation and rattle glassware, is the man who owns half of Manhattan standing in the kitchen like hired help? The dining room went silent. Just like that. Forks stopped midair. Champagne halted at lips. Camilla's head turned slowly toward us, her face pale as porcelain. Ronan looked up, blinking like someone had just switched on a light in a dark room. Margot turned her head with such slow disdain that it might have been a performance until she saw Dominic. And saw me behind him. Still as stone, still as truth. That knock at the door hadn't just been a guest. It was the reckoning. And I was done being quiet. Dominic's voice cut through the air like a blade dipped in clarity, and for a second, I thought maybe he'd broken a chandelier with how fast heads whipped around. Forks were abandoned mid-bite. Champagne glasses froze in midair. Even the kind of ambient classical music that dripped like syrup through the Whitmore sound system seemed to hesitate. Why, Dominic repeated, louder this time, is the man who owns half of Manhattan standing in the kitchen like hired help? Silence. Thick, full, brutal. The kind that makes truth feel heavier than a gavel. Camilla's face drained of all color. Her napkin slipped from her lap onto the floor, and she didn't even notice. Across from her, Ronan stared like he'd just seen a ghost tap dancing in a three-piece suit. Margot? She was motionless, a frozen portrait of denial framed in her own illusion of power. And Benedict Whitmore, her husband, barely lifted his eyes, but I caught the faint twitch of his temple. That man knew the smell of a threat. I stepped forward. 1 step. 2. My leather shoes clicked softly on the polished floor as I crossed from shadow to spotlight. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't retreating. I was reclaiming. Dominic didn't move. He just lifted his phone slowly, like an offering. The screen already pulled to the Bloomberg article, the headline burning bright. Julian Reese closes $3.8 billion deal in Dubai. Sterling Group, now top global landholder. He turned the screen toward the table like it was scripture. That man, he said, nodding toward me, just became the single largest private landowner in the Northern Hemisphere. And you had him eating with the staff. You could have heard a diamond earring hit the floor. Camilla looked at me, not the way a wife looks at her husband, but the way someone stares at a mirror they'd ignored for too long. All those years, all those family events where I was introduced as Camilla's husband, Julian, like my name needed softening. All the dinners where they asked what I did again, even though Margot once hosted a gala in a building I owned. All of it came back like a slap. Dominic's voice stayed steady, low and cold now, almost pitying. You people have been stepping on his name like it was lint. You thought he was some charity case Camilla picked up off a job site. But that man built an empire while you were polishing your goddamn silverware. Dominic, Camilla finally whispered, enough. No, he snapped, turning to her. Not enough. You sat there and let them humiliate him. In his building. His. Ronan croaked, finding his voice at last. This is our Al. No, it's not, I said, speaking for the first time since stepping into the dining room. Not anymore. Haven't been for 2 years. Ronan stared at me like I just pulled off a mask. Margot opened her mouth, closed it. The room seemed to tilt. You bought the building? Benedict asked. I was now fully locked on mine. I bought the shell corporation that acquired the property from Whitmore Holdings when it was struggling with liquidity, I replied calmly. Which I know you tried to quietly undo through a back-channel buyer, by the way. That fell through. My team made sure of it. Margot finally stood up. Her pearls clacked against her chest like a nervous metronome. Why would you hide that? I met her gaze squarely. Because I wanted to see who you were without my net under you. Camilla pushed back from her chair, but she didn't stand. Her hands gripped the edge of the table like it was holding her to the world. Her voice came out shaky. Julian, you never told me. I looked at her. Not through her. At her. My wife. The woman I had once believed saw me beyond the surface, beyond the name and neighborhood. And I could see in her eyes that she hadn't lied, at least not fully. She hadn't known everything, but she'd known enough. You knew pieces, I said. You saw the cars. The accounts. You knew about Sterling. But you liked the idea of me needing your family. It kept the scales tilted. That's not fair. What's not fair, Dominic said, cutting in again, is that the man who donated anonymously to Margot's cancer research gala, who saved Ronan's company through a disguised investment trust, and who paid for the renovation wing of your country club without taking credit, that man just got told to eat with the help. Camilla finally stood. Her chin quivered. You made me believe you were still climbing, Julian. I thought we were building this life together. And we were, I said quietly. But you didn't stop them. You didn't defend me when it counted. And that tells me exactly how you've been building. Her lip trembled. Her mother reached out to grab her wrist, but Camilla pulled away. You can't just barge in here and blow everything up, Margot snapped, suddenly finding her spine again. Funny, I said, because from where I'm standing, I'm just finally claiming what's mine. Benedict cleared his throat, slow and methodical. So what happens now? I tilted my head slightly. Now? You finish your meal. Ronan stood, voice loud and panicked. Julian, about that investment pitch. I held up a hand. Don't. But, don't. His mouth snapped shut. For once, he listened. Dominic turned toward the door, already one step ahead. You coming? I took one last look around the table. At the fine china. At the gold-rimmed glasses. At the family that had played gatekeeper with a key I never needed. Then I nodded. Yeah, let's go. As I turned to follow Dominic out, the room behind me stayed silent. No one moved. No one called out. Even Camilla, whose eyes followed me like a fading memory, didn't say another word. They had always looked at me like I didn't belong. Now they could sit in the wreckage of that mistake and realize I never needed their permission to matter. The sound of my shoes against their marble floors didn't echo, it thundered. Not in volume, but in finality. Every step I took back into that dining room landed like punctuation at the end of a sentence none of them had ever prepared to read. I didn't belong in their story, not as they'd written it. I was the background husband, the outsider with good posture and quiet eyes, the convenient silence next to their daughter's dazzling image. I had played my part until now. As I walked toward the table, I could feel their eyes tracking me, adjusting, recalculating. Camilla stood stiffly behind her chair. Ronan's face still hadn't recovered from the shock Dominic dropped like a bomb. Margot looked as though she'd tasted something sour, and Benedict, well, he sat with his fingers templed under his chin, studying me like I was an equation that had finally started solving itself without him. Dominic walked beside me, calm and unbothered. His phone was still in his hand, screen glowing, headline pulled up like an indictment. Julian Reese closes $3.8 billion deal in Dubai. Sterling Group now top global landholder. He didn't need to say anything. The headline did the talking. The room, for the first time in its well-manicured existence, had no language for what it had just witnessed. I stopped at the head of the table, the seat I'd never once been offered. No one told me to sit. No one dared to move. So I remained standing. Let's make this quick, I said. The weight of my voice dropped over the room like a curtain. Calm. Even. But absolute. You all thought I was someone you could ignore. Some middle-class artifact Camilla brought home. A curiosity with a decent tie and better manners. You made me invisible because that made it easier for you to believe you were still in control. No one responded. I let the silence breathe, then continued. You ever wonder how Ronan's company avoided bankruptcy last year? I looked at him directly. The anonymous capital injection that saved your quarterly report? His mouth opened. The Dubai-based trust? I nod. Margot looked like she was choking on her own composure. That was you. I turned to her. The donor for your foundation's gala, yes. The silent backer for the country club expansion? Also me. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted to see how you behaved when you thought no one was watching. She scoffed, clinging to the only thing left, contempt. So you've been spying on us? Lurking in the shadows like a snake. No, I said. Just listening. You said I belonged in the kitchen, Margot. Turns out, I belonged on the deed. Camilla's voice finally broke through. Why didn't you tell me? She looked at me like the woman I married. But there was fear now. Fear that the version of me she'd built her life around had been a carefully managed mirage. It wasn't. I had been honest with her, just not loud about it. That was her world's language. Noise, applause, proclamations. Mine had always been quieter, quicker, real. I told you enough, I said. And the rest? You didn't ask. Or maybe you didn't want to know. That landed harder than I meant it to. Her shoulders wilted. Dominic pulled out a chair at the far end of the table and sat down, casually placing his phone face up in front of him. I'd stay for dessert, he said, but I already lost my appetite. Ronan tried to recover. Julian, listen, this is all a misunderstanding. We didn't know. That's the point, I said. You never wanted to know. You preferred the version of me you could control. And Camilla, I turned to her again, you let them do it. Every time your mother cut me off in conversation. Every time Ronan talked down to me like I was just a footnote in your life. Every time they laughed at the things I said, like I was entertainment instead of family. I didn't think it would go this far, she said, voice cracking. That's because it wasn't going too far for you, I said. You got to stay comfortable. You didn't have to fight. I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because I couldn't carry the weight of her silence anymore. Benedict cleared his throat again. So now what? You've proven your point. Is this some elaborate power play? I stepped forward slowly, my hands at my sides, every inch of my body still calm. This isn't about power. It's about place. You all made it very clear where you thought I belonged. I just wanted to show you the truth. Dominic stood again and turned to me. We've got a reservation. You ready? I nodded once, but didn't move yet. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to remember the moment when the masks cracked. Margot looked away first, jaw tight. Ronan was still scrolling through his phone, probably trying to verify everything he'd just heard. Camilla. Camilla's eyes were glassy. She wasn't crying, but she looked close. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again. That was her move, always has been. Not the lie, not the betrayal, the silence. I turned and walked away without waiting to hear if she'd try again. As I passed the kitchen staff still hovering near the hallway, I gave a subtle nod. Some of them smiled. Others looked at me with wide eyes like they were trying to solve a puzzle. I didn't need them to understand everything, just enough to know that today wasn't just about the Whitmores. It was about reclaiming myself in a space that tried to erase me. Dominic opened the front door, and the cool Manhattan night air hit like a baptism. Clean. Free. He glanced sideways at me as we stepped into the elevator. You sure you're okay? I'm better than okay, I said, adjusting my cuffs. For the first time in years, I finally said something. We descended in silence, the city stretching out below us like a map I knew by heart. This was mine. All of it. And they were just catching up. There's something about standing in front of people who once dismissed you that changes your breath. You don't breathe like you did before. Not shallow, not defensive, not like you're waiting for permission to speak. You breathe fully, grounded, like you've remembered your own name and are about to say it with the weight it deserves. That's exactly how it felt when I turned back to them from the doorway. The dining room still looked pristine, every place setting untouched since Dominic and I detonated the truth in the middle of their curated little Thanksgiving. But beneath the polished silverware and flickering candles, the air was brittle, cracked. I didn't owe them a word. Not after the years of quiet tolerance, the underhanded insults, the way they had whittled me down to something ornamental. But I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for me, and for the version of me they never bothered to learn. I think I owe you all a story, I said, stepping back in. Camilla looked like she'd stopped breathing. Ronan had turned ghost white, his phone forgotten. Margot blinked like she was resetting her reality. Only Benedict, the patriarch who ran his family like a company and his company like a kingdom, leaned back in his chair with any semblance of control. But even he didn't speak. He knew the floor was mine now. I cleared my throat once. Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be deliberate. I met Camilla 4 years ago, I began. At a valuation meeting for Whitmore and Langston. You remember that firm? Camilla's father's legacy, the one that was on the brink of insolvency. Benedict flinched, just slightly. I was there under the name Jonathan Reed, one of several aliases I've used during acquisition rounds. We were scouting the firm for a quiet takeover. I was supposed to sit in for 15 minutes, get what I needed, and leave. Camilla swallowed hard, her eyes never leaving me. But then I met her, I said. She came in late, spoke up during the numbers review, challenged the forecast. She was smart, confident, and a little reckless. I like that. Ronan shifted in his seat. You lied to her? I shook my head. No. I introduced myself honestly, my real name, not my business one. She didn't know the size of what I did. I didn't want her to. I've been watched too long by people who only saw dollar signs. I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for the man I was, not the empire I ran. I turned toward Margot next. You always assumed I was some second-tier contractor or maybe a well-dressed technician. That amused me more than it offended me. Because the truth is, by the time I met Camilla, I'd already owned 16 buildings across 5 cities. I started in Jackson Heights with 2 condemned brownstones and a loan from a man who couldn't read or write but knew value when he saw it. His name was Ernesto. He died before he could see what I built. The room had gone absolutely still. I founded Sterling Group from a basement office in Queens. 1 table, 1 laptop, no legacy, no trust fund, just me. I didn't take vacations. I didn't go out. I reinvested everything. And within 5 years, I was turning buildings other developers ignored into luxury spaces with purpose. I bought up rent-controlled units and turned them into cooperative housing. I made sure veterans had places to live. I worked quietly. I paused for a second, then added, because I never needed a spotlight. I needed results. Camilla looked like she wanted to cry, but not out of sadness. Out of shock. Out of seeing someone she thought she knew unfold in real time, bigger and deeper than she imagined. I was the anonymous benefactor behind your gala, Margot, I continued. The one that raised over $8 million for your cancer research. You made a toast that night. You said, if only we knew who to thank. And I raised my glass quietly. Right beside you. Margot's eyes glossed over. She looked like a woman unraveling, slowly but publicly. And Ronan, I turned my attention to him now. You strutted into that boardroom 3 months ago, asking for capital to save your company. You begged an overseas trust to float you for 1 more quarter. You had no idea that trust reported to me. His face flushed crimson. You said no. No, I corrected. I let you sweat. Then I said yes. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, helping you would mean something to this family. I thought maybe it would earn respect. But all it earned me was a folding chair next to a warming tray full of Brussels sprouts while your mother laughed at my expense. The tension cracked across the table like drywood under pressure. I stepped forward. Let me reintroduce myself. My name is Julian Reese, founder and CEO of Sterling Group. I own over 230 properties across 5 countries. I've negotiated deals with governments. I've sat across from sheiks and senators. And today, I closed the largest real estate acquisition in the Northern Hemisphere. No one spoke. They couldn't. I have operated in silence for years, I said. Because silence lets you see clearly. Who claps when you win? Who stays when you fall? Who fights when you're disrespected? My eyes flicked to Camilla again. And who doesn't? She blinked quickly. Once. Twice. Her fingers trembled on the back of her chair. I didn't mean to let them. But you did, I said gently. Not because you're cruel, but because comfort makes cowards of people who know better. That truth didn't come from spite. It came from experience. I loved her once with my whole chest. But love needs more than whispers in private and silence in public. So now what? Benedicta asked. You walk away? Burn the bridge. I met his gaze. No, I don't need to burn the bridge. I built the land it stands on. You'll either walk it differently or fall. Then I turned around and left. No dramatic exit. No slamming doors. Just the truth, finally out in the open, standing tall with its chin high. Behind me, the Whitmores stayed seated, because for once, they were in the presence of something real, and they didn't know how to move. I didn't expect her to follow me. Not then. Not after everything. But as soon as I reached the elevator and pressed the button, I heard the soft click of heels behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. Julian, Camilla said quietly. Her voice didn't carry the defiance I used to admire in her. It sounded smaller now, fragile, like something unraveling at the seams. I stepped into the elevator and held the door. She hesitated at the threshold. Can I come? I nodded once. The doors closed with a whisper, sealing us into that familiar metallic silence. Just the 2 of us. No audience. No family. No masks. We stood side by side, the soft hum of dissent beneath us. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. And in that stillness, I realized something. This wasn't the first time Camilla had been quiet when it mattered. It had just never been this loud. I didn't know about the Dubai deal, she said, finally, or that you were still operating under Sterling. You knew enough, I replied, my voice flat. She winced, like she'd been expecting softness and got steel instead. I thought staying quiet would keep the peace. And what exactly did that peace cost, Camilla? Because it sure as hell wasn't your dignity. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Camilla never cried. She had the Whitmore spine, straight as a ruler and twice as stiff. She'd learned to hold everything in place, even when it was collapsing. I didn't think it would get this bad. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think. You just adapted. Adjusted. You sat through insult after insult and decided that silence was the safer bet. But it wasn't safe for me, Camilla. It was suffocating. Her shoulders dropped. You think I didn't see it? You think I didn't feel it? Every time my mother cut you off, every time Ronan made those smug little comments, I knew what they were doing. But I didn't want to start a war. No, I said, turning to face her fully now. You just let them kill me by paper cuts. That stopped her. Her breath hitched. I let it go the first year. I told myself they'd come around. I continued. Then the second year came. Same tone. Same dismissiveness. And you started explaining me away like I was a complication, not your husband. Oh, Julian's still finding his place, you said at brunch. Remember that. Her lips parted slightly. That's not how I meant it. But it's what you said. And you know what the worst part is? I believed you. I convinced myself that love meant compromise. That maybe if I just stayed patient long enough, you'd speak up. She looked down at her hands. Her nails were perfect, polished, understated, like everything about her. I'm sorry. I stared at her. At the woman I married. The woman who once talked circles around Wall Street analysts and had the nerve to challenge CEOs in stilettos. Where was that Camilla when her mother laughed me into the kitchen? Where was that Camilla when I was made to feel like a burden in my own marriage? I didn't want to choose, she said, softer now. Between you and them. I thought I could have both. You could have, I said, if you had stood with me. But you didn't. You stayed seated at their table while they handed me a plate in the back. The elevator dinged. Ground floor. The doors opened. The marble lobby stretched out in front of us, quiet and expensive, the kind of place that echoed status. I stepped out. She followed. Outside, the cold air slapped against my face, crisp and cutting. Dominic was already waiting by the curb, talking to a driver. The black car gleamed under the city lights. I stopped short of the door. Camilla reached for my hand, slowly, like it was glass she wasn't sure she was allowed to hold anymore. Julian, I don't want this to be how it ends. I didn't pull away, but I didn't return the gesture either. I let her fingers rest there, ghosting over mine. It didn't have to end this way. I know. Then why did you let it? She bit her lip, looking up at me. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I pushed back too hard, I'd lose everything. I turned to her, finally, eyes narrowed. You were never at risk of losing me, Camilla. You lost me the moment you decided I wasn't worth defending. She flinched again, but she didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me the truth had already taken root. Dominic stepped forward. Tables waiting. I nodded, then looked back at her. You can come, but not as a Whitmore. Not with silence as your +1. She looked at the car, at me, at the city blinking behind us. And if I'm not ready, then don't follow me, I said. Because I'm done shrinking to fit into a world that pretends it's better than mine. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her hesitation was already loud enough. I opened the car door and slid in beside Dominic. As we pulled away, I looked back once through the tinted glass. Camilla stood there, arms crossed, hair blowing in the wind, a statue carved in indecision. Dominic leaned back in his seat. You okay? I watched the skyline pass. Getting there. He didn't push. That's the thing about friends who've been through your trenches. They know when silence is healing, not cowardice. I leaned back, exhaled, and closed my eyes. Camilla thought silence would protect what we had, but it only proved she wasn't willing to fight for it. And I was done loving someone who whispered in rooms where I was being shouted at. The moment the car pulled away from the Whitmore building, it felt like air returned to my lungs in full. A different kind of air. The kind that didn't come filtered through elitist judgment or measured in microaggressions wrapped in gold leaf. I wasn't looking back. Not really. Because what was behind me wasn't just a family dinner. It was a system I'd been silently feeding while starving myself of dignity. And tonight, that ended. Dominic glanced at me from across the leather seat, his phone resting on his knee. You hungry? I laughed. It surprised both of us. Starving. He smirked. Le Pavilion's expecting us. Private room, 10-course tasting menu. And I called ahead. I raised an eyebrow. You called ahead? After you got sent to the kitchen like a damn bellhop? You think I wasn't going to do something? Come on, man. The car turned east, the city humming outside like a lullaby I knew by heart. We were headed toward Midtown, toward one of the most exclusive restaurants in New York. Not for show, not for revenge, for reclamation. I wasn't chasing a different table tonight, I was building a new one. I pulled out my phone and opened the group message thread I'd started with Dominic and my assistant a few months ago. Beneath it was another, smaller one, labeled Staff Thanksgiving 2023. I scrolled through the names of the people I'd eaten beside earlier. Caterers, sous chefs, runners. Every one of them written off by Margot Whitmore as background noise. I started typing. Change of plans. Le Pavilion. Private room. You're all invited. Be there in 20 minutes. This one's on me. Within seconds, responses came in. Wait, for real? Sir, are you sure? Is this a prank? Chef Pierre will lose his mind. Be there. Thank you, Mr. Reese. Dominic leaned over to glance. You just invited the entire kitchen staff? I nodded. They treated me like a person when her family didn't. That's more than enough reason. He smiled and shook his head. You never do things halfway. No point pretending anymore, I said. Tonight's Thanksgiving. Let's make it mean something. By the time we pulled up to the restaurant's discreet entrance on Vanderbilt, the private dining manager was already waiting at the curb, coat wrapped around her like armor against the wind. She smiled warmly when she saw me. Mr. Reese, she said, everything's ready. Chef says he's personally preparing the final plating. Perfect, I said, stepping out. And we'll be adding about 12 more seats. Give or take. She didn't even blink. Of course, that's what respect looks like. Not a title, not a favor, but understanding your name has weight and using it to lift others, not step on them. Inside, the lights were low and the glass walls shimmered with reflections of the city beyond. The private room sat nestled near the back, elegant and quiet, with a long oak table and brass-tipped chairs that curved like sculpture. I'd eaten here dozens of times, hosted investors, diplomats, city planners. But tonight was the first time I felt like it belonged to me in more than just name. One by one, the kitchen staff from the Whitmore penthouse trickled in. Still in partial uniforms, still smelling faintly of time and heat and long hours. But their eyes were wide with wonder, nervous smiles, hushed whispers. I stood and greeted each of them like old friends. No titles, no hierarchy. Just people who knew how to stand in a room that didn't always make space for them. Dominic raised a toast once everyone had taken their seats. To those who feed others, and finally get to eat like they matter. Laughter broke out, then applause. Someone joked about smuggling extra rolls. Another marveled at the cutlery. It wasn't extravagant, it was honest. And honest was everything I'd missed for years. The tasting menu began. Warm sourdough and citrus butter. A crab tartlet that melted before it touched the tongue. Poached halibut so tender it made a grown man sigh. And every bite was served with care, with intention. Not just for show, but for presence. Camilla arrived midway through the third course. She stood in the doorway, dressed still in the ivory silk blouse from earlier, but without the rigid perfection that usually clung to age. I didn't want to stay there, she said quietly, just to me. Not after everything. Not after watching you walk out and realizing I'd sat through years of you being erased while I called it tradition. I didn't speak. I waited for her to finish. I don't know what happens after tonight, she added. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here. With you. As me. I pulled out the empty chair beside mine. Slowly. Silently. She sat. Not as a Whitmore. Not as the heir to a dynasty. But as a woman who finally chose truth over comfort. The servers didn't miss a beat. The next course arrived. Duck confit with black cherry glaze. And the table erupted again into laughter and praise. Camilla leaned close, voice nearly a whisper. I don't deserve this. No, I said gently, not to wound, but to be clear. But maybe now, you're ready to earn it. Her hand rested on the table, unsure, hesitant. I didn't take it. Not yet. Trust doesn't return in one night. But I didn't pull away either. We sat there, side by side, while the room buzzed with real joy, with people whose names I now knew, whose stories I now cared about. It was Thanksgiving, but not the one I'd been invited to. This was mine. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I just had to be. The clink of forks against porcelain sounded nothing like the Whitmore table. There was no forced politeness, no rehearsed laughter, no pecking order disguised as etiquette. Just honest joy, richer than any wine Margot had ever served, deeper than any toast Ronan had fumbled through. This table? This was mine. Le Pavilion's private dining room pulsed with life. The kitchen staff I had dined beside earlier, those quiet professionals who knew how to move with precision and humility, now leaned back in their chairs, eyes wide, mouths full, laughing without restraint. You can see it in the way they sat. Relaxed, unburdened. As if someone had peeled the label of worker off their backs and let them just be people. The sommelier approached with a fresh bottle of Côte Rôtie. He poured it for the entire table without asking for approval, because here, everyone drank like equals. One of the pastry chefs raised a glass and nodded toward me. Mr. Reese, I don't know what the hell we did to get invited here, but this? He gestured at the golden duck breast on his plate. This is crazy. It's not crazy, I said with a small smile. It's overdue. They chuckled. A sous chef across from him leaned forward. Seriously, though, you had us fooled. I thought you were just another guest. Didn't even know who you were until someone showed me that article. I shrugged. Sometimes the quietest guy in the room is just deciding if the room deserves him. Dominic chuckled from beside me. You should print that on business cards. Camilla was quiet. She hadn't touched her wine yet, but her plate was half cleared. She was listening, watching, absorbing. I'd seen that look on her before. In pitch meetings, in gallery events, in boardrooms where she could command the space with a single glance. But tonight, it was different. She wasn't performing. She was present. I glanced at her. You okay? She nodded slowly, eyes glancing across the table, where the pastry chef was mimicking a stuffy aristocrat voice, mocking Margot's earlier servants eat separately comment. Everyone laughed. Even Camilla allowed a small smile. I've never been part of a dinner like this, she said quietly. That's because this isn't a dinner, I replied. It's a correction. She blinked, unsure how to respond. You know what the real difference is? I asked. At your family's table, everyone watches what they say. Here, everyone says what they mean. A waiter arrived with the next course, veal cheeks with heirloom carrots, resting in a red wine reduction that made one of the servers whistle. I watched as the dishes were set down, not with practiced choreography, but with pride. Each plate a reminder that tonight wasn't a performance. It was a celebration. The head chef stepped into the room moments later. Pierre. Tall. Stern. A genius with food and an even bigger genius with people. He looked at me and smiled. Your usual, Mr. Reese? He asked. Yes, and bring enough for everyone. He nodded and disappeared without fanfare. Camilla turned toward me, brows raised. You have a usual here? I nodded. Used to come once a month. After big closings. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with partners. Never with me. You were always busy. Or your mother had a gala. Or a tasting. Or a fundraiser you couldn't say no to. Her gaze dropped to her lap. I leaned back. Not out of arrogance, out of clarity. I was beginning to see what life felt like when you stopped bending. When you stopped waiting for permission to exist fully. This table, surrounded by people who had been overlooked all night, felt more like family than the one I married into. Dominic raised his glass. To new traditions, he said. Everyone followed suit. I lifted my glass, not just out of courtesy, but with purpose. To the people who work the hardest and get thanked the least. May they never sit in silence again. The cheer that followed wasn't theatrical, it was real. As dessert arrived, pear sorbet with candied ginger and a bourbon drizzle, I noticed Camilla finally exhale. Something loosened in her. Her posture softened. Her fingers tapped the stem of her glass, like she was finally grounding herself in the moment. I want to be better, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Not just to you. To me. To who I've let myself become. I looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't trying to spin it. She wasn't lobbying for forgiveness. She was just honest. And for once, not dressed in justification. You can start by remembering how tonight felt, I said. Because if you ever forget again, I won't stay quiet next time. I don't want you to, she replied. I want you to keep speaking. Keep walking out when it's wrong. Even if I'm the one sitting still. That surprised me. But it also made sense. Camilla had always respected strength, real strength. Not posture or money or lineage. But choice. Grit. Presence. She reached for my hand again, slower this time, and I let her take it. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. The table spoke for us. The laughter, the refills, the warm thank yous from the staff. I saw it all reflected in her eyes. She was beginning to understand the language I'd spoken for years, the one that didn't need titles or monograms. Just truth. This was the first Thanksgiving I'd ever enjoyed without pretending to be smaller. The first time I didn't wear my silence like a shield. I didn't have to apologize for who I was or where I came from. No one asked me to justify myself, and not a single soul at that table cared whether my last name opened doors in Southampton or Geneva. They just saw me. That was all I ever wanted. Not acknowledgement, not applause, just to be seen, fully. And tonight, I was. Some people lose gracefully. Others adapt. And then there are people like Margot Whitmore, people so entangled in their own illusion of control that when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't just shake them. It shatters them. While I was eating creme brulee with the kitchen staff and toasting sous chefs like they were heads of state, Margot Whitmore was unraveling. I didn't need a phone call to know that. I didn't need a headline, or a gossip column, or a discreet little whisper from one of her socialite friends. No. I knew because people like Margot don't let humiliation go unchallenged. They recalculate. They maneuver. And when that fails, they collapse. Not with drama, but with a quiet, desperate flurry of control slipping through perfectly manicured fingers. By the time we left Le Pavillon, around midnight, Dominic had already started getting alerts. A business associate texted him, "You see what she's doing?" Another message popped up from my legal counsel. Margot's foundation is attempting emergency restructuring. Looks like she's trying to move money out of the holding account. Desperation has a signature, and Margot's was now scribbled all over the back end of her empire. We were in the car again, heading back to my place. Not the penthouse Camilla once insisted we live in to please appearances, but the quiet duplex I'd kept in Tribeca. The one with the soft lighting, the worn leather chair, the original art by the struggling painter I once funded because I believed in his hands more than his resume. My place. Camilla sat beside me. She'd stayed silent for most of the ride, but her eyes were alert. She was processing. Maybe grieving. I wasn't sure. Grieving the myth of her family, maybe, or the role she played in sustaining it. Dominic read the latest message out loud. She's trying to sell the Wexford Avenue property. I didn't even blink. She can't. Why not? Camilla asked. I looked at her. Because I bought it 2 weeks ago. Through a proxy. She's trying to sell a building she no longer owns. Camilla winced. Jesus. She never checked the new deeds, I said. She assumed because her name was on it last year, it still meant something. She's spiraling, Dominic muttered, almost to himself. She knows the mask slipped. She's trying to pull strings that don't connect anymore. My phone buzzed. Another message from Marcus. Press is circling. Dubai deals officially mainstream. NYT profile incoming. They want to know why you were at the Whitmore dinner. I turned the screen off. I didn't need a headline to validate anything. Let them speculate. Let them piece together the truth like it was some elaborate puzzle. I'd spent years building in the shadows. If the light found me now, it was because I opened the door. Back at the duplex, I poured myself a drink, nothing flashy, just a neat pour of Oban. The kind of drink you sip when the world's trying to catch up to you, but you've already moved on. Camilla walked in slowly, glancing at the familiar art on the walls, the dim warmth of the space she hadn't visited in months. I forgot how much I loved this place, she said. You never fought for it, I replied, sipping. She sat down on the edge of the couch, smoothing her dress absent-mindedly. That's true. I looked at her. Really looked. No make-believe. No curated version of the woman I'd married. Just her, quiet and raw, and for once, not armoring herself in appearances. She's calling everyone, Camilla said after a pause. Trying to contain the damage. I got 3 voicemails from her on the way here. What did she say? That she forgave me, she said bitterly. That I'd been confused by your charm, and that a marriage built on deceit can't last. Then she offered to host a small family brunch tomorrow so we could talk like adults. I laughed, one dry, sharp note. She's spinning so hard she's dizzy. She's scared, Camilla said. She's never been powerless before. Margot's power came from perception. That's all it ever was. Money she didn't earn. Status she inherited. She controlled rooms with posture and whispers. But now, I gestured vaguely. Now she's learning what it feels like to have the floor pulled out from under her. Camilla watched me closely. And how does it feel, watching her panic like this? I thought about that. Really thought about it. Honestly, it feels like closure. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just release. Like I've finally stopped apologizing for being more than they could stomach. She nodded slowly. You deserved better. I still do. Her eyes flicked up. Do you think I'm her? No, I said immediately. But you listened to her too long, and you let her silence become your own. Camilla nodded. Not anymore. I watched her for a beat, then offered the other glass I'd poured. She took it. We didn't toast. We just drank, side by side. The collapse of Margot Whitmore wouldn't come with headlines or lawsuits. It wouldn't come with her being thrown out of a boardroom or barred from a charity auction. It would come in waves of reality, properties she thought she owned no longer hers, allies quietly backing away, invitations shrinking. It would come when the name Julian Reese showed up on building permits and foundation records where her own name used to reign. It would come slowly, quietly, just like the years she spent diminishing me. That's the thing about collapse, it rarely explodes. It erodes, one truth at a time. And Margot's truth was simple. She didn't run the room anymore. She just hadn't accepted it yet. The city glowed through the windows like a constellation made just for me. Yellow pinpricks of ambition. Silver streaks of movement. Skyscrapers I once only admired from the sidewalk now bore my signature deep in their foundations. The Whitmores could keep their pedigrees and their portraits above fireplaces. Me? I had concrete. Steel. Ownership. Camilla sat next to me on the couch in the Tribeca duplex. Her heels were off, tucked beside the leg of the sofa like she'd finally decided she didn't need to stand on anything. Not tonight. Her posture had changed. Not slouched, just honest. The kind of posture that says, I'm done pretending to be untouchable. She turned her head slowly toward me. You built a world right in front of us. And we all missed it. No, I said. You didn't miss it. You ignored it. She didn't argue. Didn't flinch. Because it was easier. I nodded. And because I let you. We sat there for a while, letting that settle between us like dust on hardwood floors. Not sharp. Just real. She reached out, hesitated, then laid her hand gently over mine. I want to rebuild with you. Not just your empire. Us. It was the first time she didn't speak like a Whitmore. It was the first time she didn't lead with apology or explanation, but desire. Quiet, raw, and uncertain. I looked at our hands. I didn't pull away, but I didn't clasp hers either. Not yet. I don't know what that looks like, I said. Not right now. I know, she whispered, but I needed to say it. She had needed 1,000 chances to speak up before. And tonight, she finally did, after everything was already on fire. But maybe some people only find their voice in the smoke. Maybe that's what grief does. Maybe that's what truth demands. I stood slowly and walked toward the window. The city spread before me, wide and waiting. You know, I said without turning around, when I was 17, I delivered groceries to Park Avenue apartments. One night, I had to bring a crate of wine to some charity dinner uptown. I wasn't allowed through the front door. They sent me to the service entrance. Camilla stood too, arms folded around herself. I remember walking past the dining room. I continued, seeing them through the glass wall. These people in tuxedos and gowns, sipping French reds like it meant something. I was dripping in snow, carrying boxes, being ignored like I didn't even breathe. I turned to face her now. And I told myself then, if I ever built something big enough to stand beside those towers, I'd never forget what the back entrance felt like. Camilla's eyes shimmered. You didn't forget. No, I said, but I did forgive too much. I let silence pass as peace. I let their condescension slide because I thought love meant patience. But love, real love, doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller. She took a tentative step forward. Then let me try again. No family. No performances. Just me. As I am. And who are you, Camilla? I asked. She didn't flinch. I'm someone who knows now that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. That tradition doesn't equal truth. That silence is not grace, it's consent. That answer hit like breath in cold air, unexpected but necessary. I gave her a long look. Then you better be ready for what comes next. Because I'm not dimming anymore. I wouldn't ask you to, she said. The rest of the night passed not like a movie, not like some final redemption arc, but like real life. Quiet. Measured. She slept in the guest room. I stayed on the couch. We didn't kiss. We didn't promise anything. But we didn't slam doors either. The next morning, headlines exploded. Julian Reese, the billionaire hidden in plain sight. Whitmore matriarch scrambles to retain foundation control after anonymous donor revealed. Real estate titans' Thanksgiving standoff goes viral. They spun the story how they wanted to, of course, half awe, half scandal. But it didn't matter. I didn't need to control the narrative. I was the narrative now. I went back to work that Monday. Walked through my building with my team beside me. I didn't wear a suit that day. No tie. Just a dark Henley and a jacket. I didn't need armor anymore. Everyone already knew who I was. As I passed the glass conference room, I caught my reflection. For a second, I saw the version of myself I'd spent so long burying, the kid from Queens who once studied floor plans on lunch breaks, who used to skip dinner to afford concrete samples. And beside that, layered over it, was the man who now owned more square footage than most banks could finance. I smiled. That evening, Camilla texted, "Your mother's favorite restaurant was Hillcrest Diner, right?" "Yeah," I replied. "Why?" "Because I made a reservation. I'll be there at 6. If you're free." That wasn't a Whitmore move. That was a Reese move. Low-key. Intentional. A place where no one wore cashmere or commented on your knife grip. A place where people ate, not posed. I showed up at 6:04. She was already seated, drinking a cup of tea with chipped edges. She stood when I arrived, even smiled. Not the polished kind. The real kind. I sat across from her, looked her in the eye, and for the first time, I saw a woman who wasn't just sorry. She was ready. "Why here?" I asked. She shrugged. "Because I figured if I'm going to rebuild anything, it should start with your roots. Not mine." That answer told me more than 100 apologies ever could. We ate, talked, laughed even. She didn't mention Margot. I didn't bring up the articles. There was no need. Because here's what I learned through all of it. When people try to put you in a place, it's usually because they're terrified of what you might be outside of it. But Queens raised me to know better. Queens taught me that dignity isn't something you inherit. It's something you protect. And Queens doesn't stay in the kitchen. Queens builds the house, then owns it, and decides who gets to stay.